My name is Mike Smith. We're at Auburn University, and I'm interviewing Mr. Tom Stofer. And Mr. Tom, I do have your permission to record this.
You do.
Yes, sir. And I guess we'll just kind of jump right into it, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Mr. Tom, if you could just tell me a little bit about your early, childhood, some things of where you were born, where you grew up, and, kind of what the family looked like.
Okay. I was born in Burbank, California, and grew up in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles, graduating high school there in 1971 at the age of 17, and went into the Airforce at the age of 17.
Okay. So right out of high school.
Right out of high school.
Okay. And did you grow up with both of your parents?
Single parent. My mom raised my sister and I, the two of us. And my mom and dad divorced when I was quite young. And so that was a family dynamics anyways.
Yes. And older sister, younger sister?
Younger sister by 2 years.
Younger sister by 2 years. So growing up in the valley with your mom and your sister.
That's it.
Okay. What high school did you attend?
I graduated from Sylmar High School, which was at the northern end of the San Fernando Valley, up and over the Hollywood Hills, from downtown Los Angeles area, and grew up on the beaches of Southern California in the 60s during the Beach Boy era and all that good stuff.
So you were a surfer?
I was a surfer.
Okay. Surfers in California in the 1960s must have been an exciting place to be.
That I was, and it was a very exciting time.
How do you said you graduated high school and went straight into the Air Force. How did some of the surfing, the culture of your days on the beach and surfing, how did that influence your decision to join the Air Force, or were you drafted?
I received at that time, they weren't drafting as much as you were having to register with Selective Service. So I did get a notification to register with Selective Service, which I did. And I was actually going to go to school at UCLA that fall and was registered to go to school at UCLA. And a lot of my friends at that particular time, Vietnam was still going on and pretty hot and heavy. And a lot of my friends were joining the military at that time. And they said, hey, if you don't have a plan to finance your education, the GI Bill would be a way to go. And to get that, you have to have served time with Uncle Sam. So I think that influenced me in large part was the fact that I had some friends going in the military at that time. And I saw it as a way to finance my education. So I think that was the biggest influencer with me to join the military.
Yeah, thank you. Did your family have a history of military service that you know of? Or?
Yeah, they did. My dad served post World War II. I had an uncle that served in World War II, and I had another uncle that was currently in the Army at the time. He was a senior NCO in the Army at the time. So yeah, we did have some background in the military. I didn't pave the way in that area, and but I wasn't heavily influenced by any of them, even though I had family had served in combat operations in World War II and stuff. Back then, you didn't speak too heavily about it. They came home and didn't talk a lot about their war experiences. And I think I'm kind of the same way. I've done some stuff, and I don't talk a lot about it. And of course, I've never sat down with somebody who's really delved into my background with the military or anything. And I just really have not spoke a whole lot about it, even though it was 20 years of my life.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I really don't know why that is. I've never had anybody just sit down and say to me, hey, tell me about when you did this, or tell me about when you did that. It's just about like folks aren't really interested in what you did or where you were at the time. I guess I don't know. And also, when you try to talk or try to speak with someone who's never had a military, that does not have a military background and has not had that exposure, a lot of times it's hard to communicate with them because they just simply don't understand. And I'll give you a prime example. I just changed physicians and just had a doctor's appointment this morning. And my new doctor, because my old doctor moved, so I got a new doctor, and he's a flight surgeon. And he's down at Danley Field with the reserves on the weekends. And I instantly connected with him this morning because of that military background. And so you say, why don't you talk about it? I have with other GIs because they understand, they've been there, done that. But if you talk to a civilian about what you did in the military, they can't even relate because they just have never had that exposure. And so I don't think they really appreciate it. And because they don't have that exposure and that connection, they just really simply don't care.
Yeah, thank you for, sharing that. And we're super appreciative of you sitting down with us today as we talk about this. Do you think it's a generational thing, the silence about your military service, or do you think that that's coming from, you talked about your father and then your uncle and some other relatives that served and didn't really talk about their service, and then you kind of carry that forward into your era of service? Do you think it's just a generational thing as well, or do you think it's mostly just finding the people to connect to?
That's a darn good question, and I simply don't know the answer to that. It could possibly be a generational thing, but here's a thing to keep in mind, Mike. I am a Vietnam era veteran. The GIs coming back from Vietnam, it was a whole different situation than the people returning from Iraq and Iran and Desert Storm and Desert Shield and all that. I can I can relate this story to you real quick. I was recruiting for the Air Force in Los Angeles in about 1978. Vietnam, we pulled out of Saigon in 1975, so we're talking about 3 years after the Vietnam War, and we had colleges in the Southern California area, that was where I was recruiting at the time, that did not want us wearing our military uniform on the campus. Now, to me, that's crazy. That's a crazy thought. And nowadays, 2025, you would never walk up to someone and say, hey, we don't want you wearing that military uniform on Auburn University. But I was actually told at a couple of colleges in Los Angeles that I was recruiting on that, hey, you can come out here and recruit, but keep it low key, and we don't want you in uniform. So I actually wore civilian clothes out to the universities out there to recruit people to come into the Air Force. So go figure.
Yeah. If you can remember back to that time, was there certain talks within the recruiting station or some of your colleagues that you were recruiting with about a certain, how did you feel about that at that time?
Well, I was proud of the military, proud of my service. I lived and breathed the military for 20 years. I loved it, and you come back, or you retire, or you get out, and it's just a lot of folks just didn't want to talk about that era in time. The whole Vietnam situation, I think Vietnam actually started in about 1959 and went to 1975. It was a long war. A lot of folks lost children in that war, and husbands and fathers, what have you. And it was just like they just really didn't want to talk about it. And again, I didn't talk a lot about it. So I think we missed a whole lot of history there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I guess since we kind of moved right into the Vietnam era of your career, your early career, where did you join the military from? And can you tell us about that experience, about joining the military during an era of Vietnam since you joined in 1971?
Yeah, funny you should ask, Mike. It's a kind of a neat little story. Once I decided I was going to go into the military, I was 17 years old at the time, and had to get my mom to sign for me to go in, and so I made the decision, and I had my selective service notice in one hand, and I walked into the recruiting center down there in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles. And as I walked into the building, unannounced, they had the Army office, as I recall, and opposite that you had Navy, and then down the hall was the Marine Corps, and across from that was the Air Force. And I had a real close friend of mine who had just enlisted into the Air Force, so I thought, I'm going to give the Air Force a try first of all. And I was told by a number of my high school buddies, you don't want to go into the Army, you don't want to go into the Marines because you'll be in the jungles of Vietnam. And so I thought, I'm going to give the Air Force a try. So I went down and walked into the Air Force recruiter's office, and I said, hey, I've got a selective service notice here, and if I don't go in the military, there's probably a chance of me being drafted. And I heard about the GI Bill and on and on and on. And I said, can you get me into the Air Force? And I would prefer the Air Force over the other branches. And he said, possible. But he said, let me ask you this. If I can get you into the Air Force, would you want to come in as an aircraft mechanic, an aircraft mechanic, an aircraft mechanic, or an aircraft mechanic? Which one of those would you like? And wanting to go into the Air Force first and foremost, I said, I think I'll take that aircraft mechanic job. And so that's exactly what I did. I came in the Air Force as an aircraft mechanic. It's not like recruiting nowadays. Of course, I recruited for the Air Force for a lot of years, and we could open up a lot of areas to a young person coming into my office. In that, do you want to go into mechanical area or electronics area or administrative area or what have you? Back when I joined, they knew what they needed, they knew what they wanted, and bingo, if you walked into the office, that was you. And you didn't have a whole lot of choice.
Yeah, so coming into the Air Force as an aircraft mechanic, where did you conduct all your training at? Maybe your basic training and your advanced training?
Basic training was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. And then from there, I went up to aircraft mechanic school. I went up to Wichita Falls, to Texas, to Shepherd Air Force Base. And I believe that's where, to this day, we're talking 50-some years later, I believe to this day that's where they're still doing the aircraft maintenance training at. So.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about basic training and your advanced training for the aircraft mechanic? Was it what you thought it was going to be going in? And, what was your experience like?
Well, basic training, I can remember arriving at Lackland Air Force Base in the wee hours of the morning after being processed in at the station in Los Angeles there and flying down to San Antonio. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning by now. I can remember the drill instructor screaming and yelling at us. We were all standing out there in our street clothes with our long hair and what have you. And he was screaming and yelling at us. And it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd been up since about 2 o'clock the morning before. And the first thought that came through my mind is, Tom, what have you gotten yourself into? And I thought, this is going to be a ride here. And not being raised with a father, only a mother, I didn't have that manly influence, if you will. So I thought maybe what I'm getting myself into is above and beyond me. And so as it turned out, I breezed right through basic training, not a problem, and then went up to tech school. And what helped me at tech school was the fact that in aircraft maintenance, when I grew up, I lived just about with my uncle out in his garage. I didn't have a father, but I had an uncle that I was close to, and he was always out in the garage tinkering with a car or with something. And I spent a lot of hours out in the garage, so I knew all of my tools. I knew a crescent wrench from vice grips, from Phillips screwdrivers to common screwdrivers to what have you. And so when I went to aircraft maintenance school, First, I scored high on the ASVAB test that you have to take to go in the military. I scored real high in the mechanical area of the ASVAB test, so I knew I was quite mechanically inclined. I relate that back to my years of being in the garage with my uncle. So when I went up to tech school, about the first week or two of school is nothing but tool recognition. That you got to know the tools before you can apply them to the airplane. And I just breezed right through it. I just about slept through the first 2 weeks because I knew all the tools. And getting out there on the flight line and twisting wrenches on airplanes and stuff was, to me, just came so easy and so natural. I thought, Tom, I think you got into an area that you're really going to love. And I did. I really enjoyed the career field and spent a number of years doing it.
Felt natural to you.
Came natural to me.
Yeah. So upon graduating your aircraft maintenance school, what happened next? Where did you go from there?
My first duty assignment was to McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. We're right outside of Sacramento, California. McClellan Air Force Base, and that was my first assignment. And ended up doing about 3 years at McClellan. We had there at McClellan, I was assigned to the 552nd Air Early Warning and Control Wing, which is a air reconnaissance wing. We had radar airplanes. I worked on the EC-121, which was a Super Constellation airplane built by Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, and had a big radome on the top and a big radome on the bottom. It was 4 large reciprocating engine aircraft engines on the aircraft. And that's what I was assigned to, and that's what I worked on for my first several years in the Air Force.
Now, would you fly on those aircraft during that time?
I did do some flying on those airplanes as an in-flight mech. An example of that would be at the time Nixon was president, and he was going down to Key Biscayne, Florida, to I believe his presidential retreat in Key Biscayne, Florida. And we would go down there and fly circles around Cuba. It was during the Cold War and post-Cold War, but Cuba was still an issue with the U.S. And so while Nixon was in Florida vacationing, we would fly from California with a stop at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and then we'd fly on down to McCoy Air Force Base in Orlando, Florida, which is now Orlando International Airport. But at that time, it was McCoy Air Force Base. We'd fly down there, and then we'd go up and fly missions, basically circles around Cuba, and while the president was in Key Biscayne. And so I did do some flying on the aircraft, but most of what I did was on the ground. I primarily worked the isochronal inspection dock, and what I mean by isochronal inspection for aviators, that's when you take the airplane in, and it's what you unbutton the aircraft. You take all the panels off, and you have all the shops come in, and they do heavy maintenance on the aircraft. And that's a periodical or a phase type of maintenance. It's more in depth than phase maintenance, but it's a periodical type of thing. Every aircraft goes through isochronal inspection every so often. And I worked the isochronal inspection dock, tearing those airplanes apart and putting them back together. And that's primarily what I did at McClellan Air Force Base.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you mentioned, like, during the Cold War there, that you were flying reconnaissance missions around, Cuba during the height of the Cold War. And earlier in the interview, you said you were a Vietnam era veteran. What do you mean by Vietnam era veteran? And I'm sorry.
Yeah, to actually be, and there's some discussion on the whole matter, but actually to be a Vietnam veteran, I believe you had to have served at least 6 months of boots on the ground in Vietnam. I did not. I was in Vietnam a couple of times out of Karat Royal Thai Air Base in Thailand. So I am more of what you consider a Vietnam era veteran. I served during Vietnam. I served in Southeast Asia, but I didn't have an assignment in Vietnam per se. So I'm considered a Vietnam era veteran, and I do not wear the Vietnam Service Medal. So that's the distinction there.
Were you awarded the service medal, the Vietnam Service Medal?
No,
No.
no. Again, you had to have done a actual tour in Vietnam, and my work, the things I did in Vietnam were actually just out of Thailand, because I was actually based in Thailand.
So based in Thailand and conducting some operations within Vietnam on the ground and the airspace.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Can you tell me a little bit about the missions that you kind of flew on and supported while you were stationed in Thailand?
I was in McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. I was assigned to the 552nd Air Early Warning and Control Wing. One of our detachments was located at Karat Royal Thai Air Force Base or Air Base in Karat, Thailand. We had the EC-121, our radar airplanes, were assigned there. And we flew radar missions all over Southeast Asia. Places we should have been, places we shouldn't have been, but we were flying reconnaissance missions. And my specific job in Thailand was working out on the flight line, launching those aircraft and recovering those aircraft off of their missions. And they would go up and fly quite long, extensive missions in the air. And their job was to spot any enemy aircraft, enemy ground targets and stuff, and to direct our resources in to neutralize those targets. So that's what our mission was. We were called the eye in the sky, and from when you get up to altitude, those radar airplanes can spot things you would not believe they could spot. And inside that aircraft, if you walk through the fuselage of that aircraft inside, they had a lot of radar scopes. I can't recall how many exactly, but say 7 or 8 or 10 on the left side and 7 or 8 or 10 down the right side. And we had radar operators sitting at each of those scopes, and we call them scope dopes. And so we'd have the aircraft commander, the co-pilot, flight engineer. Those were the three that were up on the flight deck. Sometimes they'd fly with a flight mechanic. Like me, a flight mechanic. Sometimes they wouldn't. And then back in your passenger compartment, per se, would be all of your scope dopes back there. And their mission was to sit back there and look at those scopes and, again, identify our enemy, and then make a decision on what was going to happen from there. So a quite important mission. They still have the AWACS aircraft. They operate out of Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma there. And the AWACS airplanes still perform a critical mission for the military. And I was quite proud to be a part of that organization.
Did you fly on any of those missions, on some of those reconnaissance missions while you were coming and going from Thailand?
I did not fly any of the reconnaissance missions simply because I was probably needed more on the ground to keep those planes turned around. We were launching aircraft at all times of the day and night. I mean, it was nothing for me to be on the flight line at 2 o'clock in the morning, launching an airplane or recovering one and making sure those airplanes were ready to fly so that when those flight crews came out, that airplane was ready to go. And when you're in a combat environment, there's no time to say, well, we're not ready to go. And that's not the answer nobody wants. So you do everything within your power to keep those airplanes in the air, because when they're sitting on the tarmac, they're not doing nobody any good.
A 24/7 job.
It's a 24/7 job.
How long were you stationed in Thailand for?
About 52 years ago now. So I was over there in 1973. And so I was thinking the other day, gosh, it's been over 50 years now since I was in Southeast Asia. So,
And how long did you spend in Thailand?
I went over there initially, Mike, on a 90-day TDY assignment, and something the military's very good at, and that's extending you. So they get you over there, and they extended me once I was scheduled to rotate back to the United States. They extended me. So I think I ended up being over there actually about 5 months. They don't like to keep you more than 6 months. And the reason why is the second they keep you over 6 months, then it becomes a longer tour, and you get credit for that. So that when they bring you back to the United States, if you served a full tour over there, they give you a while before they might send you for another long tour. But if they send you TDY, they can do that as many times as they want to. So if I send Tom over there and keep him there for 4 or 5 months, I can bring him back to Sacramento, California, let him get a 1-week stay, and put him right back over there. And I don't never get credit for a long tour. Mm-hmm. So, but to answer your question, it was about 5 months.
5 months. Were you subject to multiple tours in Thailand with the short tours like you were talking about, or did just one?
Well, I just won. And the reason why, that was in 73. And a few months later after I got back, I went for 2 years to Turkey. So I was I say the second, within months of coming back from Thailand, I went to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey for 2 years. So I was in Turkey from 74 to 76. And I think a reason for that is I was a sergeant at that time, a young sergeant, but I was a sergeant. I was a very, if I can pat myself on the back, I was a very good aircraft mechanic. I knew airplanes inside and out, and I believe they needed me in Turkey. Mm-hmm. And we had 4 aircraft over there in Turkey. We had 2 T-29s and 2 131s. And so I went over there and did missions over there for 2 years and did some flight mech work over there, flew a lot of missions over there in Turkey. So because of that, I only did the one stint in Thailand.
Yeah, and I see that going back, you joined in 71 right out of high school. So I'm thinking mid-71, would that be correct?
Yes, I joined. I actually went in the Air Force. I joined in August and actually left, I think, like the first week of September of 71.
Okay, yeah. So, and then in 73, you were a sergeant already.
I had just made buck sergeant when I went to Thailand. So it was funny because I got to Thailand and I was just a young kid. You got to keep in mind, I was 20 years old. And because I was a sergeant, I already had people working for me. Mm-hmm. So, and that has served me well all of my life because when it comes to supervising and managing people, I've done it my entire life. It started when I was 20 years old. So I got to Thailand and they put me in charge of airplanes and launching airplanes and stuff and gave me a number of troops to work for me to help accomplish those missions. And I didn't even know how to spell supervisor, and here I were one.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, at such a young age, you had a lot of responsibility, it sounds like, and, and in a foreign place, somewhere outside of your home base of Sacramento. If you can kind of tell us about, some of your first impressions of Thailand, of the, did you say Korat
Royal Thai Air Base.
What's some of your first impressions as getting there as a young 20-year-old sergeant in the Air Force? Do you remember thinking to yourself, I'm in a foreign place, or what were some of your thoughts during that time period, if you can remember back?
Interesting question, because a lot of things went through my mind at that time. I was very young. When I grew up in the church. My mom had us in church all the time. I became very involved in church with youth groups and what have you. So I grew up in a church environment. When I got to Thailand, the first thing that came to mind is, buddy, you're not in a church environment anymore. When the GIs over there weren't launching aircraft, they were drinking in the bars and raising hell, if you will. And so I thought, wow, what a different world over here. And so that was really my first impression. My second impression, Mike, was that how hot and humid it was over there. Being raised in California, I hadn't been exposed to a real hot and humid environment. Now, a lot of people say, "Well, you're in one now. You're in Alabama. It's hot and humid here." Let me tell you, my friend, it's nothing like Southeast Asia. It is hot, 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 and humid as all get out over there. And one of the first things that came to my mind is, and this Vietnam was going on, and my first thought was, we've got guys in places over here in this heat and humidity, doing things that I probably can't even imagine. And I'm very fortunate that I was in the Air Force, and I was thinking that there's probably people over here sleeping in tents and putting up with this heat and humidity, and it gave me a whole new appreciation, if you will, for people that serve in the military. And I'm a big military proponent. Any young man or woman nowadays that says, "Hey, I'm going into the military," I don't care what branch it's in, I'm going to be the first to shake their hand or pat them on the back, because I strongly believe in the military. And you said, me being a young man at 20 years old, going in when I was 17, it made me grow up real fast. And I already mentioned that I grew up with a mom only. So I turned into a man, I tell people, overnight. It gave me a lot of responsibility and opened my eyes to the world at a very, very young age. And I basically grew up overnight.
Yeah, thank you for that. You mentioned something that I find very interesting, is that you gained an appreciation for military service while you were in the service. So recognizing the I guess the service and sacrifice of service members, not only in Thailand working with you, but in other places like Vietnam at that time. Some of the things that you mentioned, over there, do you feel like most people felt the same way? Most of the soldiers that were their Air Force airmen that were serving with you?
Don't know. I never talked to another GI about something like that. Mm-hmm. I had a deep appreciation for the military, probably one of the reasons why I made the decision to go in. And when I got some suggestions or ideas about going in, it was kind of an easy decision for me to make, because I have always thought highly of the military. But does everybody that's in the military have that same feeling that I do? Probably not. It would be great if they did. And that's probably why a lot of folks get in the military, and after 3 or 4 years, they say, "You know what, this ain't for me," and they get out. Mm-hmm. And because maybe not everybody feels like I do. And I must say that even in my first few years in the military, I pushed the limits. I wore my hair a little bit longer than I probably should have, and stuff like that. And I'll give you a real quick funny story. I was working the isochronal inspection docks there at McClellan Air Force Base, and I kept going in, and I needed a haircut. I kind of knew I needed a haircut, but I was pushing the limits as a young man in the military. And I had an old master sergeant that I worked for, and he'd tell me every day I'd come in, he said, I was this airman at that time, he'd say, "Airman Stofer, you get a haircut." I'd say, "Yes, sir." Next day I'd come in, wouldn't have a haircut. "Airman Stofer, you better get a haircut." "Yes, sir." Next day I'd go in, wouldn't have a haircut. This went on for about a week. And I walked in one morning and without the haircut, and he says, "Get outside of my truck." And he had an old red pickup truck. And I went and got in his pickup truck, and he drove me down to the base barber shop. And I think haircuts were 75 cents at that time. And he made me shell out the 75 cents. I got up in the chair, and Don Mello was his name, Master Sergeant Mello. And Master Sergeant Mello told that barber in that base barber shop at McClellan Air Force Base, he says, "I want him looking just like he came out of basic training." and they buzzed every bit of my head. Every bit of my hair was buzzed off again. And so I even pushed the limits, Mike, back in my early career. I pushed it. And it wasn't actually until about 1976 or 77, I had a captain that walked into my office one day, and he says, "You mind if I talk to you?" And I said, "No, sir." I said, "Come on in." He walked into my office, and he closed my door, and he says, "Listen," he says, "I see a lot of potential in you, but," he says, I also see a few issues with you." And he says, "I don't think you are 100% committed to the Air Force." And he gave me some examples, and I thought, you know what, he's probably right. And he says, "If you decide to stay in the Air Force, here's some suggestions I have for you to help you go a long ways in the military. But if you don't take these suggestions and you just continue to kind of float around like you're floating around," he says, "do us all a favor. Get the hell out of the military." And after he gave me that checkup from the neck up, if you will, I started thinking about that. And it was right after that that I got back into college. I started taking night classes in Los Angeles there, going back to college at night. This was after doing a full day of the Air Force during the day. I would go back to school at night. I can remember not getting home until 9, 10 o'clock at night because I was in class, and did that for years. And I started competing for NCO of the month and NCO of the year and all these things. And as I began to do that, my career started flourishing. And again, I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but there's a lot of people that if they can retire out of the Air Force with one meritorious service medal, which is awarded by the president, that's quite a feat. And I retired with 5 MSMs. And I found promotions came real quick. I had a colonel who took me under his wing, and everywhere he went, he'd call me up and want me to come there. So when he left Los Angeles and went to Sacramento, he called me, said, "I want you to come to work for me in Sacramento." I did. He left Sacramento, went to San Antonio at Randolph Air Force Base, and he said, "Hey, I'm down at Randolph. I want you to come to Randolph." I packed up my family and household goods and moved to Randolph, and he took me under his wing. And when he did that, those medals, my performance evaluations were top notch. I was promoted at the earliest opportunity. And because of that captain in 1976 or 77 giving me that little talk behind closed doors, accelerated my career. And I'm proud to say that when I retired in 1991 out of the Air Force, I was pretty highly decorated and proud of what I had done in the military, but it was because of one individual.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And you said it was in 1976, so a post-Vietnam Air Force at the time, when you had the discussion with that young officer and kind of moved that way. If I could just back us up a little bit before we get to 1991, you mentioned earlier in Thailand at the base, there was some the U.S. service members, when they had some off time, they took advantage of it, and you kind of let your hair down a little bit, metaphorically. But what was the living conditions like on that air base in Thailand, and what was the relationship like with the local population there? Do you recall anybody, or can you share a little bit
Sure.
about that?
The Thais loved us because there's an old saying, if I can, and I will. The Thais used to always say, "The GIs are overpaid, oversexed, and over here." But we fed a lot of money into their economy, and they loved the GIs over there, and so our working relationship, both on the Air Force base with the Thai Air Force, was a great relationship. The relationship we had with on the local economy, with the Thais on local economy, was great, and I enjoyed being over there. And again, it's nothing like going downtown to Toomer's Corner. When you left the base and you had to take a bus, But when you took a bus to downtown Karat, you got off the bus and it was nothing but tattoo parlors, nightclubs, and what have you, all up and down the streets. A lot of bars, a lot of drinking, because when the GIs over there, generally speaking, not everybody, but generally speaking, when they weren't fighting, when they weren't launching airplanes and flying and all that, when they weren't fighting, they were partying. And so that's just kind of the environment of it over there at the time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the stories of Thailand and your service in Vietnam. As you were, coming back from Thailand and entering in this era of post-Vietnam era, do you remember the conclusion of Vietnam and like the Saigon, what's your memories of how the Vietnam War ended and did that influence your decision to stay in the Air Force? And do you remember anything, if you could share any of that with us?
We pulled out of Saigon. We pulled out of Saigon in '75. At that time, I was mid-tour in Turkey. I was in Turkey from '74 to '76. So in 1975, we were pulling out of Saigon. I can remember being in Turkey. We had a C-5 aircraft, which is our largest transport airplane. We had a C-5 loaded up with refugees leaving Vietnam, and that C-5 crashed and killed most everybody. I can't remember if it killed everybody, but killed most everybody on the aircraft. And when that was actually happening, I had just flew a C-5 home from Turkey to the East Coast here on leave. I was flying standby, flew a C-5 home, and at that particular time that C-5 crashed in Saigon, I was on a C-5 flying home after doing 1 year in Turkey, and I had to go back and do another year. But I flew home for a few weeks on a C-5. That airplane crashed in Saigon, and they grounded all C-5s. So I couldn't get back to Turkey on a C-5. The 141 picked up the 141s picked up the weight that the C-5s couldn't haul. So they were flying all cargo, and they weren't taking any passengers. So I could not get back to Turkey. So I thought, how in the heck am I going to get back to Turkey? So I ended up going up to Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire and catching a KC-135, an air refueling aircraft. I caught it out of Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire and managed to get that aircraft, hop on that airplane and fly back to Torrejon, Spain. And then when I got back into Spain, and I believe I took a 130 from Spain on to Turkey. But I can remember quite vividly, Mike, Vietnam ending. It was a crazy war, a crazy war, a crazy time. It was just, it's sad. I tell people every day, if we could never fight another war, that would be just fine with me. If instead of dropping bombs, if we could just hug each other and work it out, that would be great with me, because there's no winners in war. Nobody wins. And it was just kind of sad. The Paris Peace Accords was signed in January of '73, and that basically put into place a ceasefire in Vietnam. Combat operations kind of came to a standstill in Vietnam, and that was in January of '73. But then the war still drug out for 2 more years until '75. So it was just sad. We lost a lot of people over there, lost a lot of equipment over there, and so again, I just hearken back to this saying that there's just no winners in war.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you for that insight. When you were coming back from Turkey and Thailand and all these things, this was right around that Vietnam, during the Vietnam War and at the conclusion of Vietnam. Do you remember how reintegration into, because when you left Thailand, you came back to Sacramento, California. Do you remember like the welcome home, or your coming back to the United States from serving abroad? Do you remember any of that? Anything stand out
I
to you with
do, I
that?
do, and nothing like today. You have your military men and women now returning from service in Iraq, Iran, wherever. Uh, everybody applauds them as they're walking through the airports, and there's parades down main streets and towns and stuff. It's nothing like that during Vietnam War. We had a lot of service members come back from Vietnam with no fanfare whatsoever, and it's kind of sad. But that's just the way. That's the way it is, because so many Americans wanted us out of Vietnam and really turned against the government. And instead of having parades down Main Street during Vietnam, they were having protests and burning buildings and everything else, because America in general, Americans in general wanted us out of Southeast Asia. So they really had a bone to pick with the government. And keep in mind that there was a lot of people here losing loved ones over there. And so it was 180 out from what's happening nowadays.
Yeah, thank you for that. If we could fast forward a little bit here, I know that you, after Vietnam, you ended up achieving the rank of sergeant. You moved on to Turkey and did a 2-year stint over there. The rest of your career, kind of, if you can just shed some insight on that, because you served for how long?
A little over 20 years.
A little over 20 years. And so after Turkey, just some of your touch points on the rest of your career?
Real quickly, if I can, I came back from Turkey in 76, and I was assigned to Craig Air Force Base over in here, just a short ways in Selma, Alabama. That base is no longer in existence, or it's closed anyways. That base closed in 1977, and I was there when we closed Craig Air Force Base in Selma. But at that time, it was one of 7 undergraduate pilot training bases. They trained pilots in Selma, Alabama. I was assigned to Selma, and I came back and I worked in journalism. When I was in Turkey, I ferried one of the last propeller-driven airplanes out of Turkey. We had 4 planes in Turkey. We had 2 T-29s and 2 131s. I was assigned to a base flight outfit over there, and all we did was fly generals around. And if there was a pregnant mom up country, we'd go pick her up and bring her down to Incirlik to the regional hospital so she could have her baby. And we flew medevac missions. We were just at the disposal of Incirlik Air Base over there. Whatever they needed us to go do, whatever mission they needed us to fly, that's what we were there to do. The decision was made to take those 4 propeller-driven airplanes out of inventory. So in 1975, late 75, I brought one of those 4 airplanes I brought from Turkey back to Davis-Monthan, which is the boneyard in Tucson, Arizona. I brought one of the airplanes back to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. I still had some months to go on my assignment in Turkey. So I went back to Turkey, but we had no airplanes. So here I am, an airplane guy, and we don't have any airplanes because we had just taken the 4 airplanes we had and brought them back stateside. So personnel told me, you're going to have to cross-train onto another aircraft. And I said, what might that be? And they said, we'll probably put you on 141s or C5s. Those are jet engine aircraft. I was a reciprocating engine aircraft mechanic. Those are jet engine. And I thought, you know what? I really am tired of working on airplanes, because when you work on airplanes, you're gone a lot. And I had a family. I had a daughter. And you're gone a lot. You're a lot of TDYs. You're a lot on the road. And I was tired of that. And I said, you know what? I want more of a 9-to-5 job. So I went to personnel and I talked to them, and they said, well, if you don't find you a job, we're going to find one for you. So I thought, wow. So I actually sat at home, if you will, for about a month because I didn't have nothing to do. I had no job. We had no airplanes. Personnel didn't know what to do with me. So when I was in high school and when I was taking college courses and stuff, one of the things I always liked was journalism. And I thought I'd like to get into radio and TV stuff, doing stuff with radio and TV. So I went over to the what they call the Office of Information there at Incirlik in Turkey, and there was a captain. He was the OIC there, and I said, "Hey, I want to get into journalism. How would I do that?" And he says, "Do you have a degree in journalism?" And I said, "No." I said, "Now I got all A's in high school." And he goes, "Yeah, but it's going to be hard to do anything for you." He said, "If you had a degree in journalism, I might be even able to get you into the office here." And I said, "I'll tell you what, if you'll take a chance on me, I'll work my butt off to try to make you happy with your decision." He ran the paperwork up to our headquarters in Ramstein, Germany. And believe it or not, Ramstein come back and said, "You're going into the Office of Information." And I became a journalist. So I left working on a flight line to going into an office and working radio and TV journalism behind a mic, kind of like we are today. That's what I did after that. So I cross-trained, became a journalist in the military. I was the editor of the newspaper over there where I was. It was called the Viewpoint. It was called I'm confused because I came back and worked for a paper here. It was called I worked for the Outlook. It was our base newspaper over there. I did some radio work. So when I actually left Turkey, I was a journalist. And when I came to Selma, Alabama, I came to Selma as a journalist. I did a radio show there every day. I was the editor of the base newspaper there, which was the Viewpoint. And so I did that. They closed that base in 1977. They said, "We're getting ready to assign you to Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma as a journalist." And about that time, what they call the recruiter team came through. And they were out recruiting recruiters. And I thought, you know what? I think I'd be a good Air Force recruiter because I love the military. I love talking about the Air Force. And I would like to make an impact on young people coming into the military. So I went and met with a recruiter team. They liked me. They ran my paperwork up the pole, came back down, and bingo, I was made an Air Force recruiter. I went to 2 months down to San Antonio to school, graduated from school, came back to Craig Air Force Base. By that time, the base had closed, and nobody was on the base except me. They moved my household goods, and I went to Los Angeles, and I was assigned to the 69th Recruiting Squadron in Los Angeles. And that was in 1977 that I became an Air Force recruiter. And I stayed in that for the rest of my career. I was an actual, what they call a bag dragging recruiter. I was out there on the streets recruiting. I moved from there to downtown Los Angeles as a supervisor at the headquarters in Los Angeles recruiting. And that's when I told you, Mike, the story about I had a colonel that said, "Come and work for me." That colonel moved to Sacramento. He became the commander of the 06 recruiting group. He called me and said, "Tom, will you come to Sacramento and work for me?" I said, "Yes, sir." So I moved my family and my household goods, and I moved to Sacramento. And I became a district supervisor. We had the 14 Western United States for recruiting. I did that. Then that colonel made general, and he moved to Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio. And when he got down there, he called me again. And he's passed away, unfortunately, but Clyde Porter was his name. And General Porter called me when he got down to San Antonio, and he called me in Sacramento and said, "Tom, would you move down to San Antonio?" And I said, "Yes, sir." So I moved everything and went to San Antonio. And at Randolph Air Force Base is the headquarters for all of recruiting all over the world. And down there, I had a big supervisory responsibility and position down there working for General Porter. And I worked there. And as I got into the late stages of my career, They sent me to the senior Air Force, NCO Air Force Academy at Gunner Air Force Base down here in Montgomery, Alabama. They sent me that. I was a senior master sergeant in the Air Force, an E8, and they sent me to the academy, and I graduated from the academy, and I was assigned as an Air Force district manager for recruiting in California. And I wasn't on a base. I was responsible for all the Air Force recruiting offices up and down the West Coast, from about San Luis Obispo, south of the Bay Area, down to into the Los Angeles area. So I was responsible for a lot of Air Force recruiting offices, a lot of Air Force recruiters, and I did that, Mike, up until the day I retired. So when I retired, I was a district manager for Air Force recruiting, and that's where I ended my career.
A 20-year career that you excelled up the ranks of the Air Force, and you worked, probably mastered 3 different jobs during this time period, from aircraft mechanic, journalism to recruitment. That's a very wide array of skill set.
That's exactly right. And I tell people that a lot of people come into the military, and what they do the day they walk in the door of the military is the same job they do 20 years later when they retire. They might, of course, they'll progress in rank and responsibility and their duties, but they'll come into the military and leave out of the military and never do anything other than that one job. And I was very blessed that I was able to work and fly on airplanes for 5 years, and then become a journalist for several years, and then go in recruiting and do something totally different. Mm-hmm. And I was very blessed again to be able to master each of those occupations, and I was rewarded for it. And I love the military. And I used to have young people come into my office, and they couldn't get into the Air Force because they wouldn't get the score they needed on the ASVAB test. And I'd say, but do you know you're qualified for the Army? Or do you know you're qualified for the Marines? Well, I don't want to go in the Army and Marines. I said, listen, you don't even know what it's about. Let me walk you around to their office, talk to them, and just see. And a lot of those young men and women ended up as a Marine or ended up as a sailor or something. And a year or two later, they would walk back into my office and say, Sergeant Stofer, you walking me around the corner to that Army recruiter was the best thing you ever could have done for me. And so I'm a big military proponent. I don't care what branch, just serve your country.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you were doing all this, and a couple of times that you were doing this with the family, sometimes in tow, closing down Air Force bases, that you're the last one getting your household goods moved. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the impact of raising a family while serving the country and over your 20-year career?
It can be tough at times, Mike. I did 5 permanent change of stations. A PCS move is what we call it. That's when you pack up your kids and your wife and your dogs and move your entire household to another location. I did that 5 times. That's an impact on the families, because each of those times your children are have to change schools. Mm-hmm. Your wife might have a decent job. Now she has to quit her job and start in a new location. I had my family in Turkey. My family was with me for 2 years in Turkey. It was kind of tough there because while my family was in Turkey, a lot of times I'd be flying to other countries. I would be in Athens, Greece, or I'd be in Wiesbaden, Germany, or I'd be in Mildenhall, England, or I'd be at Aviano, Italy, and my family was sitting in Turkey. And so it can be tough on a family, but if you ever meet the spouse of a military member, they're tough Jose's. And those wives and husbands at times, but those wives that are back home tending the family and keeping care of the kids while you're off having fun in the military, those women are some tough Jose's. And my hat's off to them, and they keep those old home fires burning. And I was very blessed in the Air Force because most all of the time I had my family with me. Now, maybe in another branch doing certain jobs, you're not quite that fortunate to have your wife and your children there with you, but I was in the military. There was times when I didn't have them, but most of the time I did. But it can be tough, and so and I think that's one of the reasons that some folks elect to get out of the military after doing 4 or 5 years, because they're in an occupation where they're spending a lot of time away from home, and they realize that my family's more important to me than Uncle Sam, and so they'll separate from the military. And I understand that. I get that. And I say my hat's off to those that serve a full career in the military. My hat's off to them, because I know what they're going through just on the home front.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about retirement and doing a 20-year plus career, and it sounds like you retired while you were stationed out in California. What brings you to Auburn today?
I came down to, I mentioned that I had, they sent me to the senior NCO, Air Force NCO Academy. That was in 1990. I came down to a Gunner Air Force Station for that academy. And while I was in Montgomery one day, I met my wife. Now, I was married for 13 years and divorced, had 2 children. And I was stayed single for 7 or 8 years. And one day I was down in Montgomery, Alabama. I met a little Southern girl, and she was 24 years old at the time. And I met her, and I went back to, after I graduated from the academy, I went back to California, and I was flying down here to see her. And because I was quite taken by this little Southern girl, and flying down here to see her all the time wasn't conducive to my schedule, and it got expensive. And so I called her up one day and said, "What do you think about moving to California?" And she had a job here and everything, and she said, "Sure." So she quit her job and she moved to California. So at that time I had a little over a year to go in the military. I was at 18 years and something, but I had planned to separate after 20 years. So she moved to California, and 35 years later, we're still married. And 35 years later, she's working on Auburn University here. She moved to California. Then after I retired, I was planning to retire back in San Antonio, Texas, because I still owned a home down there from when I was there before. I like the San Antonio area, but I knew that she had family down here and she was close to her family. So when I retired from the Air Force, I said, "You know what? As much as I love San Antonio, I love you more, and we're going to move back down to around the Auburn area." So we did. I retired back down here, and that was in 1991. So I've been here since then. I've been here many, many years. So I kid people all the time. I took her out to California. I put a little bit of city in her, but she put a whole lot of country in me. And so now people ask me, "Where are you from?" I say, I'm from Alabama, but I was actually born and raised in the LA area.
Yeah. And what was that transition like coming down to Alabama and Auburn area post-retirement? Did you launch into a second career right away? Have you been retired since then?
Pretty much launched into another career. I came down here, and I really didn't plan to do too much. And the veteran folks got my number somehow, probably off my DD Form 214 when I retired. But I got a phone call from at the house one day saying, "Hey, Sergeant Stofer, yeah, well, this is so-and-so with the VA, and have you ever thought about going back to work?" And I thought, no, not really. But I had only been retired a month or two. And so they turned me on to a couple of jobs. I did a couple of real quick jobs around the Auburn area here. Nothing suited me. And I had a buddy of mine said to me, "Have you ever thought about becoming a police officer?" And I said, "Funny you should mention that." I said, for 2 reasons. Number one, when I was early on in my Air Force career, besides being an aircraft mechanic, I was a security police augmentee, which is kind of like a police reserve officer. And so when that the Air Force had something go down and they needed extra police officers, they handed you an M16 and you were guarding a gate or something. So I did that in addition to my Air Force maintenance career field. So I did that. And then two, I had thought about becoming a California highway patrolman. I thought about that back in the late 70s when I was an Air Force recruiter in Los Angeles, because I knew some people in law enforcement there. And they said, you need to become a California highway patrol officer. And so I gave that some thought, but I thought, you know what, I'm nearly halfway into this Air Force thing. Why throw 10 years out the window or 8 years out the window? So I ended up staying in the Air Force and making it a career. And by the way, I'm glad I did, because I retired at age 37. So now for 35, 40 years or longer, I've been drawing an Air Force retirement. So thank you, Lord, for giving me that foresight. So anyways, Mike, had a buddy of mine says, go up to Auburn, put your application in to be a police officer, see what happens. So I was working for Master Lock in Auburn here, the company Master Lock, making locks and stuff, and didn't care for the job. And I got a call one day and they said, is this Mr. Stofer? And I said, yeah. They said, hey, we're testing for police officers. We got your application here. Are you still interested? I said, sure. So I came over to pick up my application, and I had real long hair, had a big beard, because after I got out of the military, something I always wanted to do was grow long hair and a beard, and I did. And I was working as a machinist over here at Master Lock, and I walked into the police department that day to get my application, and the girl behind the counter says, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I'm Tom Stofer. I'm here to get my police application. She said, yeah, wait a minute. And so she went and got my application. They gave you a whole bunch of books to study and the whole packet. And she said, I got to get a picture of you. So she walked out in the lobby, put me up against a wall and took a snapshot of me, gave me all the books, all the application stuff and everything. And before I walked out of the lobby of the police department here, she said, Mr. Stofer, can I say one thing to you? And I said, sure. And she said, don't take this wrong. And I said, okay, what is it? And she says, don't ever come back into the police department looking like that if you're going to apply with us. And so I went home and shaved everything off, Mike. I cut my hair, shaved my beard off, and I applied. It was probably 60 of us that applied to be a police officer, probably 60 of us. After we went through the complete the physical, background, psychological evaluation, written test, after we went through the whole process, there was probably 25 of us left standing out of a initial group of about 60. About 25 of us went through the whole process. I think they were hiring 2 police officers, and I thought, I don't stand a snowball chance, and you know what, of ever getting one of these 2 police officer jobs if they're selecting 2 out of 25. And the 25 guys and girls there, they were all young and right out of college with their degrees and stout and built. And I thought, no, man, I'm an older Air Force guy, retired. They're not going to choose me. And the police captain there told me, he said, hey, thanks for applying with us. Go home and we'll give you a call in a few days and let you know how you did, how you stacked up. And I had done the interview with a police chief. They call you in and do a face-to-face interview and everything. I drove home to my house, and when I walked into my house, there was a message on my recorder. It was before cell phones, Mike. Mm-hmm. Walked in, there was a message on my recorder. I listened to it. It says, this is the police department. You're one of the 2 hired. Get your butt back down here. And I turned right back around, drove right back to Auburn. And they handed me all the stuff and said, we want you back here Monday morning, ready to be issued uniforms and stuff. So I was one of the 2 hired. And I asked after that, what got me the golden ticket? And I was told that our police chief at the time, Jack Walton, Chief Walton was real big on loyalty. And he was real big on loyalty. He wanted to know that his police officers, above anything else, were going to be loyal to him and the department. And being me out of the military, I was very loyal to the military and my commanding officers and stuff. So loyalty was big to me. And so I said, what got me the golden ticket? I'm just interested to know. And they said, well, when Chief Walton asked you the question, Chief Walton said to me, he said, Mr. Stofer, define loyalty. And I said, Chief, I said, loyalty to me means that if you ever have to fall on your sword, it'll go through me before it gets to you. That's all I said. And at the end of the interview, he says, nice meeting you. Have a good day. And that answer to that question was what got me the job. So,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. How long did you serve with the Auburn Police Force?
22 years.
22 years.
Yeah. So I started basically out of the Air Force. I retired out of the Air Force in 91, and I think started the police department in 92. And I did 22 years here and retired as a police captain.
So working a lot within the Auburn community, but more specifically also with the university in some of the same areas, kind of how it is now? Or
Absolutely. Well, at that time, when I first joined the police department, Auburn University had their own police department, and I started out as a officer on the street here. So and that the city took over the campus police department in 2004. And so I made the transition in 2004 from the campus police department to the city police department. So from 1992 to about until 2004, I worked on the university here. So I worked hand in hand with all the professors, with all the staff here, with all the students. So I had a really, really close connection. We started Camp War Eagle that they have here now. We started that. When I started here, there was no such thing as Camp War Eagle. We started that in about 92, 93, 94, right around in there is when Camp War Eagle started. So I was in on that from day one on Camp War Eagle. So I worked with the students. I was always coming on campus, or I was on campus. I was always coming in and doing safety talks with sororities and fraternities and doing escape plans and emergency planning with departments on the campus and everything. I've always done all the radio and television journalism. I've done that for both police departments my whole career. They knew I had a background in that. When Jack Walton hired me at the police department in 92, he said, I see here that you have a background in journalism and TV and radio. And I said, yes, sir. He said, you're our spokesperson. You'll handle that from now on. I did. And then when I moved to the city, Chief DeGraff and Reed, who has passed since, Chief DeGraff and Reed says, hey, he says, you did it for the university all those years. You're going to do it for me. So I handled all of that for the city. And up until the day I retired, I did. Plus, I did all the recruiting for the police department. Handled all the recruiting. Plus, I was my last 7 years, I was commander of detectives and narcotics. So my primary job was commander of detectives and narcotics as a captain. But my side jobs, if you will, my auxiliary jobs, if you will, was that of recruiting police officers, and my other job was handling all the media. So when something hit the fan, I was the guy behind the TV cameras.
that sounds like a super complex job, not just the media and when managing that, but the recruitment of new young police officers, and then the head of narcotics. And
buddy, I had all three balls in the air at one time. I learned to juggle, and I thankfully I had some bosses that really believed in me. Chief Dawson, Chief Register, Chief DeGraff and Reed, Chief Jack Walton. Two out of those have since passed, but I had bosses that believed in me. I believed in them. Because of that, I was rewarded for it. I made captain here. I could have probably stayed on and been the assistant chief, or who knows, even the chief of police here in Auburn. But I always said, Mike, very early on, I said this. I said, as much as I love the military, the second I'm eligible to retire, I'm going to, because I want to go experience something new. Mm-hmm. So I went in the Air Force in 71. In 1991, I went in at 17, when I was 37, I was eligible to retire, and I did. Well, when I joined the police department here, the earliest I could retire was 60 years old. And I said, when I hit 60, the day I hit 60, I'm going to drop my retirement papers. Not that I didn't love the police department here, because I did, but I had always made myself the commitment that I was going to retire at the earliest opportunity so that I could go and experience something new. So when I turned 60 here, that was in September. My retirement was effective 1 October. So I retired, I immediately retired. And so now I've been retired 13 years. And I'm more enjoying retirement now. I enjoy watching my wife work. And so I enjoy watching her work. She's enjoying her job. And I enjoy the family, the grandkids, and I love tinkering, cars, boats, motorcycles. So I got a number of hobbies and stuff. We travel a lot. So I really am enjoying retirement now. I'd done 2 long, successful careers. 20 years, over 20 years in Airforce and over 22 years with the police department here. So I put in 40, 42, 43 years protecting my community and protecting the nation. And I did my part, and I loved every minute of it. I tell my wife every day, if I was 17, I promise you, I'd be going right back down to that recruiter's office and say, hey, can you put me in the Air Force? I'd do it all over again.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. I mean, that was, 2 different 20-year year stints, if you will, of like service. Once at the Air Force and that national level, then once of coming here to Auburn and serving the Auburn community and the university community here. I guess I'll just ask, is there one story or one memorable experience that you have from your time on campus with the University Police Force that stands out to you that you'd like to share? Or I'm sure there's a ton, but...
Wow, Mike, I'm asked that question quite a bit, and there really are. I had so many experiences, and I'll leave you with this one, and it's kind of a sad story. But if I'm going to leave a story, I would like to leave this one, because I was always big. I want students to be safe. I want students to be able to come to Auburn because their moms and dads entrust us here to watch after their sons and daughters while they're students here. We have a big responsibility and obligation to protect our students here at Auburn University the best we possibly can. Now, I used to tell those moms and dads, it's a 2-way street. I'll do everything I possibly can as a police officer here in Auburn to keep your son or daughter safe. But you have got to preach to them on your end that same message. And if we work together, maybe we can keep them safe while they're here for 4 years or 5 years. So my big thing was always telling the students, I want you to be safe above and beyond anything. I want you to come to Auburn and have a great time. Join the sororities, the fraternities, do whatever, honor society, whatever you want to do. But safety should be more important to you than even getting a degree, anything, your safety. Because if you get hurt or injured or killed, so safety was always big to me. So this is not a funny story. This is kind of a tragic one. But I've seen a number of students get hurt and even killed here. It's sad, especially when I had children their age at home. So when I would go to a scene, I would see a student that was seriously injured or killed or dying, and it would break my heart because I thought, for the sake of God, that could be my son or daughter. So back when they had the old CD Village over here on the west side of campus, I got a call one night of somebody getting injured over there. And so I rushed over there, and there was a young girl, a young student here. She was riding on the trunk of a car. She'd been under the influence, and so had the driver and a few other people in and around the car. And they had been drinking, and she was riding on the trunk of the car through the CDV area over here, campus. and she fell off the trunk of that car. And when she fell off the trunk of the car, she landed on the street, on the asphalt, face first. She face planted on the asphalt. Well, when I arrived on the scene over there, and it is kind of funny, but it's not funny, I had another female student. She ran up to me, and I got out of my police car. The ambulance wasn't even there yet. And got out of my police car, and she comes running up to me, and she says, "Officer, officer, officer, here you go." And she hands me a cup of plastic cup with milk in it. And I thought, oh, I'm not getting something here. Why the cup of milk? Well, little did I know, in the cup of milk was all of the teeth of this student who had fallen off the trunk of this car. So when she hit the ground, it knocked a lot of her teeth out of her mouth. And this other girlfriend of hers was walking around on the street picking her teeth up and putting them in a cup. And then she had heard or whatever, put milk on them. So she filled the cup up with milk. So she was running out to my police car to hand me the cup of milk
with the teeth.
That the teeth were in. So it was kind of funny, but it wasn't funny. And when I used to go around and talk to the sororities in the dorms here on campus and stuff, I always used to relate that story to them. How tragic, how stupid, how crazy can you be to be intoxicated and want to ride around on the trunk of a car, and then she ends up falling on her face and losing all of her teeth, plus the damage to her face. And fortunately, she lived to maybe tell that same story to other students and stuff, whatever. But I tell that story, Mike, to relay the message to them: be safe out there. To these students, be safe out there. And I could tell you tragic story after tragic story of students that didn't survive, that were killed doing something or whatever. Be safe. But we could sit for days, Mike, talking. Mm-hmm. When you're in police work, okay, I was 20 years in the military. I served tours overseas, Southeast Asia, Europe. I have literally been all over the world. I've been in countless countries. I've done countless things. I just thought I had seen everything. My 20 years in the military, buddy, I didn't see half of this stuff. It took me to come to Auburn, Alabama, and do 22 years of policing. And still I say to myself every day, I haven't seen it all yet, but I saw quite a bit here, and a lot of funny stories, a lot of rewarding stories, a lot of tragic stories. It's quite a job being a police officer here. And I'm going to tell you what, if you want to do something special around here, the next time you want to pat a GI, next time you want to pat a sailor or soldier on the back here and say thank you for your service, pat one of these police officers downtown at Toomer's Corner on a Friday night that's hanging out there. His family's sitting at home, but he's out there trying to keep you safe on a Friday night. Walk up and pat that officer on the back and say, "Hey, officer, thanks for being out here and trying to keep us safe," because they're doing a tough job too.
Yeah, that is very true. We often think about military service, and sometimes we don't give enough credit to first responders keeping us safe on a day-to-day basis. So
right.
I appreciate
and Mike, I might say that a lot of your first responders are prior military, a lot of them. And where was one of my great recruiting places? Over there at Fort Benning, Fort Moore, over there in Columbus. I used to go in and around that place. Used to have I hired a lot of military folks on the police force here. So many times your police officers are prior military service.
Yeah, and I think that's as we move into some of the conclusion questions about that and kind of coming full circle. I guess I would like to close with just maybe a couple more questions, if you're okay with that.
Sure, Mike.
And I think, is there kind of an open-ended question, but is there anything that we haven't covered, in our discussion today that you think is important and that you would want to just, to talk about?
Well, I think you had mentioned early on that we're kind of interested in setting down because it's getting close to Memorial Day. And so, for those folks that don't have any military exposure or experience, maybe your dad served, maybe he didn't serve, maybe your grandfather served or didn't serve, maybe you don't have a clue what the military is even about. At least have this idea that on Veterans Day, you honor anybody that ever served, whether they're in now or whether they were in at one time. On Veterans Day, you're honoring those who served. Shortly, we're going to be having Armed Forces Day. A lot of people don't even have a clue what Armed Forces Day really is all about. And then you have Memorial Day. And the Memorial Day is, it's about patting a soldier or sailor on the back and saying thank you for your service. But Memorial Day is meant to honor those who had made the ultimate sacrifice, those who have given their life for our country. That's what Memorial Day is about. So if you want to get an eye opener, and if you don't have nothing to do and you would like to do something, go on Memorial Day into a national cemetery. And we've got one down the road here. My wife and I did it a few years ago on Memorial Day. We took a ride down to the Memorial Cemetery and look at those grave markers as far as your eye can see, and remember all those people that made the ultimate sacrifice, and those people that have served your country to keep you safe, that you can be here at Auburn University getting your history degree or what have you. You can get that history degree knowing that you're in a country that's got you covered. And go into that national cemetery and look at all those grave markers, and just remember that there's people that have made big sacrifices so that you and I can remain free. And I know that day my wife and I went down there. There was a lot of people out there kneeling at grave markers out there that day, and that was her dad, that was her brother, sister, and so. We just cannot thank our military enough. And after I did my 22 years here in Auburn as a first responder, we cannot thank our first responders enough. I see the stories on TV all the time about police officers using excessive force and stuff. Does that happen? Yes, it happens. But I can promise you that is such a small, minute portion of your first responders that don't do things by the book. And we'll weed those out. They'll be weeded out. But 99.9% of your first responders, they're there because they want to be a good police officer. And they're there because they want to keep you safe.
Yeah, and I think that touches on just this continued service that we see in your story that from the Air Force to serving the Auburn community. And I can't think of a better way to really wrap up a conversation and just to say thank you for your service, your 20 years in the Air Force and your 20 years on the Auburn police force here and serving our community. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. I'll just give you one last opportunity if there's anything else that you'd like to say, and then we'll.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, Mike, that even if you don't have a military background or whatever, there's always opportunities for you to be associated with the military. I know my wife worked on campus here. She was working over at the graduate school, and she came home one day and said, "Hey, I've got an opportunity maybe to move over to ROTC on the campus." And I said, "ROTC on the university over there at Nichols Center?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Babe, if you get that opportunity, go for it." I said, "You'll have an opportunity to work around military folks all day long. How great can that be? And to get paid for it." And so she did. And then when she got the opportunity to move thanks to Captain Esposito here on campus, because he was ROTC commander at the time, and when he naval ROTC commander at the time, and when he moved over and took over as director of the Air Force Veterans Resource Center over here, he called her up and said, "Hey, come back to work for me," and working around military again, she made the move again. So she's basically been working around the military many, many years now. So if you're out there, you're listening, and the military means something to you, which it should. Even if you don't serve your nation in the military for whatever reason, maybe you got a medical issue that you can't or something. I understand that. There's still ample opportunities for you to work in and around our military community. Take advantage of it, because it will open your eyes. You will see another side of this planet, another side of the horizon that you didn't even dream possible. Sit down and listen to the stories that these folks that have served in the military, like we're doing today, Mike, you taking this, and thank you for the opportunity to sit down with you today. Sit down and just listen to what these folks, the stories they tell. The stories that they'll tell you are unbelievable. And every person that has served in the military has a story to tell.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And maybe I think I left this off earlier, but do you mind sharing your wife's name and what she does on campus?
She's the director's right-hand girl, if you will. Captain Esposito, Director Esposito. He was a naval ROTC commander. My wife worked for him for a number of years, and then when he retired and moved over as the director, he called her up. My wife actually took early retirement and to be home with me. And then when Captain Esposito and Director Esposito called her up and begged her to come back to work for him, she did. So she's over at Foy Union, working with the Air Force student veterans, and the Auburn student veterans. She loves it, loves being around the military. She eats that stuff up now, I'm telling you. And she's working over there with Director Esposito.
And what's her name?
Kat Stofer.
Kat Stofer.
Kythe is her name, but people can't say Kythe. And so she goes by Kat, and she's been on campus pushing 25 years. So I think she's looking at maybe retiring within the next couple of years. She's been on the university now for about 23 years, and she was working civilian jobs in and around Auburn here. And I told her one day, I said, "Hey, babe, do yourself a favor, get a job on the university. You'll love it." And she did. She applied, and it was hard getting on. It's not easy getting on Auburn University, but she did, and she's been here 23 years now.
Well, thank you for your service, both in the Air Force and here at Auburn, and thank you for your wife's service as well. We'll make sure we tell her for supporting the veteran community here on campus for over 2 decades, it sounds like, pushing 25 years. That's all I have for us today, but I can't thank you enough for taking the time to sit down with me, and once again, thank you for your service.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you. We'll edit out the other part. How do you feel? I'm sure in about 2 or 3 minutes we'll think of 5 things we didn't talk about. That's how it goes. Okay, perfect. You can leave it running and we could edit that, I'm sure.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Mr. Tom, I think we should be ready whenever you are, and we'll briefly go over it for you.
Well, in fact, my wife's texting me going, "Where are you at? You want to go eat something?"
Oh, yeah, you should.
Hey, we're going to eat something. We're going to eat a nail in the back of that tire right now. We're going to eat something all right. Okay, Mike.
You're good. Let's make that over. Perfect. Okay, Mr. Tom, just one last thing. As we were wrapping up the last section of the interview, we mentioned that your service in Vietnam you were based out of Thailand, but you were actually part of your TDY to Thailand. You moved over to Vietnam and actually put boots on the ground in Vietnam to conduct a special mission. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
I can. Again, Mike, I was in Thailand in '73, and that was a crazy time for the Vietnam War. And why was it crazy? In January of '73, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. That basically put a halt to combat operations, put a ceasefire in place, and but we had actually started pulling a lot of our combat aircraft out of Vietnam in about mid '72. Now, history buffs might check me on it, but I'm just going back from my memory. I believe it was about mid '72 that we started pulling a lot of our stuff out of Vietnam, a lot of our resources, because I think the writing was on the wall, and we didn't want to lose a lot of those assets. So a lot of our aircraft that were operating out of there was about 6 or 7 bases, if you will, in South Vietnam. And we started moving a lot of those combat aircraft out of Vietnam and into Thailand because we didn't want to lose those assets. So when I got to Thailand in '73, operations were ramping down. But as you know, the war actually didn't end until '75 with the fall of Saigon. So it was a very, very busy time in Vietnam in 1973 because a lot of resources were being moved and what have you. So because I worked the isochronal inspection docks at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento on the EC-121 aircraft, and because I had worked all areas of the aircraft during those isochronal inspections, I knew every nut and bolt on that airplane. I mean, I slept and ate, if you will, that airplane. I knew it inside and out, and that served me well. And that's probably one of the reasons I got assigned to Thailand on those airplanes, because you don't have anybody over there to take you by the hand and say, hey, here's what we need to do, here's what you need to do. They expect you to know it. And I was a young buck sergeant. I think I had just made put my third stripe on, but I knew that airplane. And my boss at the time knew I knew that airplane. And he said, here's what we need to do, and here's what I want you to do, and here's what I did. I flew over to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and Tan Son Nhut is in the southern part of the country. If you know the layout of the land over there, you have North Vietnam, you have South Vietnam, you have the DMZ that split the two countries, and Saigon, which was the capital of South Vietnam at the time. Tan Son Nhut Air Base is just right outside the city. In fact, in the last 50 years, it's probably inside the city now, but at that time, it's set right outside of Saigon. Tan Son Nhut Air Base was one of the bigger bases, if not the biggest base in South Vietnam that we were operating out of. So I flew from Korat over to Tan Son Nhut, and then I made the trip again. The second time, we went from Tan Son Nhut up to Da Nang, which was one of the larger bases, if not the largest base, I believe, in the northern part of South Vietnam at the time. And Da Nang, referred to back then during the war years, Rocket City, because a lot of rocket rounds came into the base, killed some folks. Da Nang was referred to as Rocket City at the time. But when I was over there, it was really winding down, really ramping down, if you will. But my boss asked me to go over and see if there was things that were particular to our aircraft, equipment, parts, supplies, what have you, and get that stuff back to Thailand, because we didn't want to lose it to the North Vietnamese. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to, if it was equipment that we really needed and really wanted and stuff, we needed to get it out of the country. And so that's what I did. I knew the parts, I knew the planes, and so go over there, see if there's things that we want or need, and let's make arrangements to get it out. And so I wasn't over there very long, very short. I could only imagine what it was like post 1973. Could only imagine what it was like back in the 60s. Da Nang, if you got an assignment to, if you were stationed Army, what have you, and you were going to be an infantryman in the jungle over there, Da Nang was probably your base. That's probably where you flew into, was Da Nang. A lot happened at Da Nang. A lot happened at Tan Son Nhut. And there was another 4 or 5 bases there that we operated out of. So anyways, that's my short experience and exposure to that. And again, I'm a history guy. My mind and my thoughts when I was over there, was how hot and humid it was over there, and how remote, how far from the U.S. it was. And I couldn't help but think of all the young men and women that went over there and sacrificed their life in the Vietnam War. That people back stateside can live in freedom. And so that was my thoughts over there. And fortunately, it was a couple more years later that we were able to bring everybody home, except for our MIA, and we still got to remember them. And so that's about that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.